Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Catherine Mattice here, founder and CEO of Civility Partners. Wherever you are in the world, we'd love to hear where you are. Please do post that in the comments so that we can see it. We always get lots of people from all around the world, and it's just great to have global conversations. Today, I have Kevin Hyer with me. Kevin has a very cool story. And so Kevin was a labor and employment attorney, and he's now the CEO of the Hyer Calling Foundation, which is a nonprofit in Philadelphia focused on the disease of addiction and a second chance at a career. And Kevin's very open, sharing that after becoming addicted to meth at 39 while he was practicing law, he realized, this is a problem and saw a whole lot of stuff that he's going to share with us today. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, obviously I say you had a meth addiction. I think people go straight into, oh my gosh, what's the story? How did that happen? So if you would share that story, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very honest about what happened to try to help as many people. Bottom line was I was 39 years old. I was staring 40 in the face. I was newly single after a long time. I'd been in a relationship with another man, another attorney, and I was feeling kind of lost. I professionally was doing well. I was with a great law firm, but I wasn't personally feeling so good. And I went to the beach with some friends, and they said, got to get your groove back. We think how Stella got her groove back. And I got caught up in the moment, and I tried meth. An attractive younger man, whatever you're into. In my case, that's what it was. Offered it to me, said it enhances intimacy. And I got caught up in the moment and I tried it. And I had never done drugs. I had maybe tried edibles once or twice, but I had never done drugs. And I went with it. And I pulled the short straw and I got addicted the first time and was shooting up crystal meth within weeks in bad parts of Philadelphia, drug houses, lost my job within 8 weeks of it, and fell into very serious drug addiction.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. You jumped straight into the deep end there with going straight from nothing to meth. So, so talk to us about the Hyer Calling Foundation. So that experience caused you you recovered, and now you're doing the Hyer Calling Foundation. And we have a comment. Hooray for Kevin's remarkable work in the world. Thank you, Ande. We love that. So tell us about the Hyer Calling Foundation.
Sure. So to bring this back to the summer of 19, when this all happened, I was practicing employment law. That's my background. I've been on both sides of the management and union piece of it. At the time, I was representing companies, but I have a deep respect for workers and unions too. So I've seen both angles of it. And, that was what I knew. What I knew was how to help people at work and help the company earn a profit and still treat people well. So when I fell into addiction, that's where my mind was. And in a year and a half or so, I was in active addiction. I saw so much, Catherine. And made me realize that, the stigmas we have around addiction are deadly. We have got to address this in America. And if I have to be the one to take this on, I'll do it. Because I've outed myself as having had this problem, because people are dying every day in America. This is not dramaticism to say this is life or death. It is a public health crisis, and we have got to address the stigma around addiction. Because when I saw those people in addiction, because I fell in it, I lived it. I was with what people would call junkies. Okay, I was one of them. I was shooting up meth. I was, by definition, that. There are a lot of good hurting people out there. And when you hear the stories behind it, domestic violence, sexual assault, that's how some people get addicted to drugs. Prostitution, twisted family rituals, like, hey, I was smoking weed with my dad at 12, so by 15 we were doing coke together, and by 18 it became heroin. There's an element of America that lives that way, all right? And then they get judged for it, and they internalize it. Drug addicts know they're drug addicts, okay? And especially if they're addicted to meth, they know how unacceptable it is, because we talked about it. And I'll say we, because I can own it now. They know about it. So it becomes this culture that is so tragic, because it's deadly, because it only gets worse. Anyone who is listening knows this. I don't have to give this piece. They know it. Addiction only gets worse, okay? The effect on your mind and body. And they do their best to try to survive, but it only gets worse, And it's heartbreaking. There is nothing other than heartbreak around this disease. And I've seen it in my family. I have a brother that I haven't seen in 12 years. The last time we saw him was an intervention that failed. Now, his addiction happens to be alcohol, but all addiction has the same outcomes, all right? Whether you're addicted to heroin, coke, meth, marijuana, alcohol, it's all the same thing, all right? And it's nothing better or worse. Drug addiction has its own special jarring reality, but at the end of the day, I think it's actually easier to come out of drug addiction than alcoholism, because alcohol is everywhere. I have tremendous respect for men and women who overcome alcoholism. So what we do, having had the experience I've had, is we go out there and just talk very honestly and say, look, the isolation of the pandemic led to a huge spike in substance abuse in America. All right. For example, women over 50 have developed alcohol addictions at a disproportionate rate. It's just one population, but it's a group that before we didn't necessarily associate developing addiction has, because we were at home. So an existing problem became hugely exacerbated. So what our foundation does is we go out there, we talk about it. We kind of go down those uncomfortable roads other people don't want to, tastefully, like I'm doing right now, and saying, look, you're talking to someone about an IV drug problem. And they can be clean cut, nice people, and they can overcome it and get back on with life. But you have to get treatment. And to get treatment, you have to be able to say you have a problem. And to say you have a problem, you have to feel safe. So, in our cancel culture, people are afraid of coming out and saying it. How many people have said to me, thank you for doing this. I have a sibling or a child or myself with a substance problem, but I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to be canceled. Okay. So that's the first thing we need to talk about it. All right. The second thing we do on a more concrete level is we provide services for people as they leave rehab to get back into the world. They're post-rehab support services that insurance does not cover. That help you get your life back. Some people call them wraparound collateral services. There are different words for it, but it's things like coaching through the International Coaching Federation. We provide it for free. Interview preparation, resume review, direct job placement assistance. In some cases, even providing legal services through outside attorneys to do things to help you move on with life, like getting your driver's license reinstated. If you can't drive to work, you can't support your family. So then you're driving illegally and you get arrested and you spend 5 or 10 days in jail and then you lose your job. So the addiction cycle, you have nothing to live for. All right. We also repair smiles, which is something I'm very, very, very proud of and probably my most signature contribution. All addiction causes dental problems. Meth is most associated with it, and meth will probably do it fastest, but they all do it. Okay. And it does for someone's confidence to be able to smile again and go back to work is a beautiful, beautiful. And that's probably my signature one. So we basically provide services that insurance doesn't cover. That might be the one, the dental piece, but it's services to get you back into the game. And they're all individualized, they're free, and they're confidential, and they're catered to the person. I can't send someone back to college for a 4-year degree, but if the answer is you need $1,000 to get, say, Microsoft Office training, we'll find that money to do it. And that then gives you something to live for. You have purpose, you have meaning, and that makes the a pull of addiction fall to a manageable level. Okay. And then lastly, we educate employers about all the wonderful gifts that people in recovery have to bring to the workforce.
So how do you do that? It sounds like you maybe help them find jobs where that company is going to be more open-minded around this person having had an addiction, or tell me more about that.
Yeah, what we do is we go out into the community and identify what I would call second chance employers. Employers that believe in just that good people can make mistakes, whatever the mistake is. In this case, it's addiction, but lots of ways we make mistakes in life, and give people a second chance. So these are employers that are not, of course, agreeing to hire any particular person, but are saying, look, we're willing to give you a second look. So those are employers that we work with. We also just culture relationships with some of your listeners, finding individuals and networks that are willing to help somebody. So, if your area happens to be, you work in marketing in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, all right? And you have someone in your community with your skill set trying to get back to work, we match you up with them. So we have a whole host of different options, but it's all around an army of volunteers and a small staff in different places that will work with you on whatever you need within reason to get you back to work. So it is a group of employers, but it's also individuals and network. It's very positive and upbeat. We're all in this together. It's a movement, is what it is. To take down the stigma of this disease, because people are dying from the stigma. They don't get help. You will die from this if you don't. It is not dramatic to say, it's reality, but you can overcome it. So that's our message. So that's what we're doing.
I love this. Do you, I'll have to pair you up with someone here in San Diego. We have a nonprofit called Free to Thrive here. Also a lawyer who does pro bono services through her nonprofit to help women who have been trafficked, men and women who have been trafficked, then that's on their record for prostitution and all this stuff when they never wanted to be there in the first place. So helping expunge records for things. So maybe you two would make a good connection.
I love that. We're trying to do things like that.
Yeah. Do you offer that type of a thing if as part of your
Not
services?
specifically, but I'd be open to it because I had a conversation with a woman recently who had a conviction from prostitution for 20 years ago. You
Mhm.
shouldn't have to tell that in a job interview today. It has no bearing on today. It's embarrassing, it's shaming, it's stigmatizing, it needs to stop. And if I have to
Yeah.
use our resources to help someone like that get an expungement, I'll do it. My donors are good people. They respect that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm fair enough. We've all made mistakes. I definitely did things 20 years ago I'm not proud of. But they're not on my resume. I'm curious what I guess I've heard when you have a drug addiction, a lot of times you kind of have to hit some version of your own personal rock bottom, and that rock bottom is different levels for everyone. What was the catalyst for you to say, "Oh my gosh, this has to stop," and for you to pull yourself out of it?
Well, you would think it had been losing my job, but it wasn't. That's the power of addiction, and especially methamphetamine addiction. I mean, it's more addictive, say, than alcohol. But again, all addictions at the end of the day have the same outcomes of jails, institutions, or death. And really,
Sure.
actually, it is death. Because even if you're in jail, unfortunately, people still do drugs and alcohol in jail. And even if you're not, the disease develops and strengthens in your body. It's progressive. It's one of the
Mm-hmm.
horrors of this disease. You have to get treatment. But when you get out, it's manageable. So what got me to this was actually being on dialysis for 10 days. In the summer of 20, I overdosed. Fentanyl got into methamphetamine, and I spent 10 days on a dialysis machine. And I had one relapse after that. There was something going on in my life. My best friend at the time had some very serious mental health problems. That a backstory to this whole thing that I'm not going to get into today, but it is part of our story is what was happening with him. And I relapsed. But after that, I got into recovery. And but yeah, it took nearly dying. And my parents at 80 years old having to deal with the fact yet a second son had fallen into addiction, because until then they didn't know, because I was older. I wasn't living with them.
Yeah.
That's an awful lot for an 80-year-old couple that their 4-year-old son developed a meth addiction because he was lonely after being a breakup. We talk honestly. This is what happened. But they got me through it. They're very proud to see this thrive, and it's our legacy at this point.
Yeah, I mean, what a great legacy. The nonprofits are often started by people's own journeys, and so really applaud, because like you said, there's a big stigma, and you could just go, I'm not going to tell anyone, and I'm going to bear this weight on my own, but you're not doing that. You're
I
making
have to. It would be wrong of me not to, and that's how I see it. I'm gay. I've never faced homophobia from being gay in educated circles in the Northeast I traveled in. I have with this. And people don't even hide it. It's not even subtle. Like, you think of like subtle racism or something, and this isn't even subtle. They don't hide it. But I don't get angry by that. This isn't anger. This is passion on my part. Let's roll up our sleeves literally and get out there and take this on. And I'm blessed that I can inject my story into the media to do it, because people are dying. I'm not being dramatic to your listeners. This stigma is deadly. We have got to address it. And if I have to take some risks out there, I'll do it.
Elaborate more. You've said that a few times. The stigma is deadly. Elaborate on what you mean by that.
Sure. People don't get help because they're ashamed. There's the labels we use: drug addict. Well, you're talking to someone who is. I recovered, and that's what we're trying to do. Let's talk about these labels that are so jarring. I'm a drunk, you're a junkie, you're a tweaker. They're very damaging because the people who fit them internalize them. I do stuff with Crystal Meth Anonymous. Okay. There are people there that fit that tweaker in a trailer park stereotype. Stereotypes exist for a reason that is so damaging for them. Okay. Because they internalize it and they rise to it. And that's not just true to addiction. It happens with all sorts of different other minority populations. And if you don't fit it, you may not think you have a problem when you do, which was my case. So that stigma, people have got to be able to say, look, I'm worried about my drinking or my drug use. Because again, it's all the same thing. It's no competition, because they don't get help. And then the other piece to this is, even if they don't die, the damage from it, the heartbreak around this disease traumatizes the family. So it becomes a generational thing, Addiction is a cycle, but it becomes a generational cycle. I mean, it's so heartbreaking. I mean, this disease destroys families. I have a mother who, didn't get to see her grandchildren grow up because of my brother's addiction. All right. Yeah. It's another holiday. Now they're probably the 13th now, and they're listening, and it's fine. It's the 13th holiday. We've not been together because of their addiction. Right? I love my family, and I love anybody out there. What I'm saying is, this disease has a level of pain and heartbreak that others don't, and at the end, what they tell you is, if you can't deal with it, go save yourself.
Right.
What a place to put a parent.
Right.
And that's what parents is taking. There's a
Yeah.
lot of work we have.
Ace's got a comment. We can't move past a person's history. That's why we're more historical. More historical than hysteric. Yeah, we do tend to focus on people's pasts. And earlier, I think in November, I did a LinkedIn Live with Jules, who is a friend of mine and a recovering alcoholic. And we talked a lot, like you said, that alcoholism has less of a stigma because it's everywhere. But if once someone crosses the line, and then they're a drunk and it's awful. But we talked in that show about including alcoholism and other types of addictions into your thought process when you're thinking about DEI in organizations. And we talked about, if you're going to have a holiday party, don't make alcohol the center of the thing. It can't be champagne toast for everyone, or let's have a mixologist come and do a party. It's got to be, it can be there, but it can't be part of it can't be the main event. That was one of the tips. But it's a little different because with meth, people are probably less likely to say, and obviously work parties aren't including meth. So yeah, it's like a super under the radar thing.
So, I use some tasteful humor. I say to people, if you're recovering from stimulant addiction, methamphetamine or coke, nobody offers you a bump of coke at lunch, but they will offer you a drink. Okay. Right. And that's where I use, again, tasteful humor, but it's true. Men and women overcoming alcoholism, I have such respect. I was able to cut meth out of my life pretty easily. You can't cut alcohol out. So our brothers and sisters in recovery who happen to have that cross to bear, they're very strong men and women. And I just have such respect for it because for whatever reason, that never flipped the switch in my body. Meth did. For my brother, it was alcohol. But I would speak to your point on inclusion. This absolutely is a DEI issue because people in recovery, you have to get into recovery for this. I'm not saying this for people who are in active addiction, but once you're in recovery, the emotional maturity from that life-changing experience, the gratitude, the profound appreciation of being given a second chance, that's a form of diversity. They call it a recovery community. It is a community. And we have gifts and talents we can bring to the table that will help the bottom line. But it's a form of inclusion. So to your statement about, a holiday party, sure, when you're having a party, bear in mind, not everyone can drink. And it doesn't matter why they can't drink. Maybe they choose not to for medical reasons. Maybe it's addiction. It doesn't really matter. So absolutely, I think in an inclusive workplace, be conscious of that. Because for someone with a serious addiction issue, they're not going to be able to come if there's alcohol served.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. And I noticed too, as we were coming back in person from COVID, alcohol is a part of the working world. It's like, let's grab happy hour. And there were several times I felt pretty openly people would just kind of be like, oh, I'm not going to order a drink. I'll just have a water. I drank too much during the lockdown, so I'm taking a break. And people were freely sharing that. Which I thought was a good step in the right direction, but they also felt more free to share it because there was a lot of articles about it. Everybody knew it. So to say I was one of those people who got caught up maybe felt a little more okay because it was like, well, everybody was kind of having a problem, so it's fine.
Well, that's what I'm harnessing right now is the fact we can talk about it a little more. It's like the doors open a crack is kind of how I describe it, to having this discussion authentically. And I'm trying to harness that energy because we all were using substances to some degree too much, maybe not to the degree of addiction, but I think people get the point I'm trying to make here. And what starts out as drinking a little much can lead to serious addiction, and it kills you. And the disease of addiction is incurable, it's progressive, and it's fatal. But you can recover. You can enter recovery, but you have to be able to say you need help. And that's what I'm trying to. And I'm taking a lot of risk, but I'm willing to take it because that's how strongly I feel about this. We have to let people admit the problem without canceling them. Right. I love that expression because it says it a little more lightly, but it's true. They're afraid of being written off, judged, discriminated.
Well, let's lean into your labor and employment background. Sure. So you've got this real unique crossover of now being focused on DEI essentially from where I sit as a culture consultant, and then you're a lawyer. So what advice do you have for employers out there who maybe sense that somebody has an addiction, their behavior has changed, or their the way they look is changing, and it's starting? How do they? Because there's so many implications there, but how do you as an employer approach someone like that with a lot of care versus
Yeah.
it looks like you're
Yes.
doing drugs, you need to have a drug test and then we're going to fire you?
Well, those are two different issues. If you think that somebody's impaired, that's a different conversation, whether you think somebody might have a problem. Their performance is slipping. Let's speak to the first one, because I think the second question about reasonable suspicion goes beyond the bounds of this interview. But what I would say is, if you, or at least in a half an hour, if you think somebody may have a problem, it's really no different than any issue in life. Like say, hey, got some time, let's talk, and keep it to specific, objective, verifiable things you've observed. Not you look like a mess these days, but hey, I noticed you came into work 15 minutes late too often lately, the last 3 times, 4 times, something like that. Objective, measurable things you observed. Your work product has decreased in volume or whatever the objective measurable metrics are. What's going on in your life? Do you need to talk? Is there some support we can offer you? And then through active listening, say, would you benefit from our EAP? One of the things I'm trying to do right now, in addition to culturing relationships with organized labor around this, is EAPs. Like we need to let people have a way to talk about this at work safely, and knowing that the person they're talking to is going to keep it confidential. So if you can't keep it confidential at work, don't come out there telling people you're going to, because that's just going to make it worse. You got to have somebody in place that if someone takes that risk and shares, yeah, you know what, the isolation of the pandemic does have me drinking too much, or I'm going through a divorce and I'm not handling it well. That's how I would start that conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point. It could be anything. Maybe they're disheveled and coming in late because they're going through something messy like a divorce versus drug addiction.
Let's be real.
So not making assumptions.
Yeah, but for many people, I think it's safe to say when their life is starting to fall apart, often addiction is involved. Not always, but more often than not, it may be. So it's certainly a way to address it sensitively. And let them know that you support recovery. So if somebody has a problem, they can go to rehab. You're willing to let them take a leave, maybe even if they're not eligible under the FMLA. And I'm not going to get into the ADA on this yet, but the point is a soft, sensitive environment is probably the first starting point.
Right. Well, we've talked a lot, even before the pandemic, talked a lot about vulnerability at work. And, I used to say before COVID, if you want, I'm a workplace bullying, toxic work environment expert. And I would say things like, if you want people to tell you about being harassed, you have to make vulnerability okay, because you're asking them to really violate a social norm, because being harassed is a vulnerable place to be. And it's like, don't be vulnerable, no crying. But if you're being harassed, make sure you tell me. And so there's a real mixed message. So we've got to lean into vulnerability at work. And I think COVID helped move the needle on that, as everybody was stressed and there was no hiding it, and people were on Zoom, and I think people just felt more comfortable maybe to talk about their vulnerabilities more so than they had in the past. So hopefully, like you said, you're grabbing this opportunity right now, and I think that conversation around vulnerability is part of what's going to help your foundation be successful.
Well, what I dove that with is, so often when there is an addiction, there's also a co-occurring mental health issue. Not always, but often there is, And frankly, if you don't have a mental health issue before you have an addiction can sometimes create a mental health issue. Mm-hmm. So I think, again, my area is addiction. It is not mental health, but, part of our story, I said, had to do with my best friend. Letting people talk about these challenges in their lives, even if it's not addiction specifically, is such a start. Because when we stigmatize things, and in the case of my friend it was, because he knew he had a condition, we stigmatize it. Nobody wants to take on labels. Labels are so damaging, So when we call people, you're a drunk, a junkie, whatever, pick your favorite one, druggie. I'm forgetting some of them. It doesn't matter. People need to be able to be who they are and talk about what's going on in their lives without fear of being canceled, as I put it, or judged. Because with addiction and mental health, certainly with addiction, but even mental health, it can be deadly. And like I said, it's generational. That to me is some of the real heartbreak on this, is even if you don't die, the family gets traumatized by it. And then the little ones, innocents, are hurt. And that's when you see the passion in my voice increase, it's that. I'm doing this for the kids out there who are in abusive homes because of parents' addiction issues that aren't being treated.
Yeah. So an easy takeaway from this too is considering, microaggressions and those types of or insults or inappropriate sarcasm that we talk about related to DEI, to remember that drug terms like that, junkie and tweaker, are part of that, part of those words we need to remove from our vernacular, especially at work, if we're going to be having an inclusive work environment. So we have 5 minutes left. Give us one last tip for employers who are interested in second chance employees for all sorts of things, what coming out of jail or having had an addiction. What are some of the sort of the tips, or where's a good place to start for an employer who's interested in tapping into that workforce?
Absolutely. We offer cultural competence training. It's actually the third prong. If you go to our website, Hyer Calling, Hyer calling.org, it's fee-for-service management training. We're a 501c3. So some of it I'll give you for free, other you have to pay for it. But you basically need to sort of recognize the gifts these people have. These people, I'm one of them. People in recovery, I'm not going to speak to the prison reentry programs. Our thing is addiction. There are some unique gifts, and you can figure out which ones align with specific positions, in different places in your recovery journey, because it's a journey, but there are unique gifts that people in recovery bring. It's a form of diversity, it's a form of DEI, and I can elaborate in very concrete, specific ways of what those things are. And I'd welcome, a free consultation with anyone on what we do around it, because we do some great stuff there.
I love it.
A great employee. I cheer to the diversity of your organization. You are doing good, but more importantly, it's good for your business too. This isn't just a soft appeal. It is helpful for people. You are doing a good thing, but you're also helping your business in an amazing way.
Yeah, 100%. Don't lose out on the talents of these individuals who got off track a little bit, but they're back. So thank you again, Kevin, and to all for joining us. Appreciate it. All the comments are really showing that people really appreciated this conversation. And again, thank you for being.
I'm trying to be very real with it.
Yeah. That's the only way to be, right? Vulnerable.